You're listening to the Open Road Vietnam, the podcast where travel, culture and real stories meet. I'm Phil, and after nearly 3 decades riding and working across this remarkable country, I'm here to share insights, experiences and the voices of the people who call Vietnam home. So settle in and let's begin this journey. Welcome to episode 1, the beginning of the Open Road. So welcome to the Open Road Vietnam. Let me give you a little introduction. My name is Phil and I've lived in Vietnam on and off since 1998. Although I've spent time living in Hanoi, which I enjoyed, and a brief spell working in Haiphong, which was less me, it's Sapa that's always felt most like home. It's here amongst the mist-covered hills and terrace rice fields that I've lived and worked and grown as a man, often quite literally, on the open road. I work closely with the Hmong and Dao communities in this region. They're, tribal groups, for want of a better word. And over the years, those relationships have shaped how I see travel, how I see and involve myself in community, and also my own personal responsibilities. When I first arrived in Vietnam back in 1998, it was a really different country. Hanoi was still a city of bicycles. The streets were narrow, calmer, absolutely calmer, and filled with the smell of wood smoke and street food. There were motorbikes, of course, but not the endless tide that you see today. Now the capital alone apparently has over 7 million of them, a living, moving orchestra that never really rests. The chaos of Hanoi beats to the rhythm of scooter engines, and the constant horns encapsulate the frenetic energy of a city that's literally and metaphorically driving forwards faster than most people can keep pace with, certainly me. The motorbike is Vietnam. It's freedom, it's family, it's livelihood and connection. Now, whether that changes in the future as a move towards four-wheel cars and other vehicles play out, who knows? But at the moment, I believe motorbikes encapsulate life here. You'll see school children perched 3 to a seat, newlyweds in their finest clothes going to their wedding or coming back on a motorbike. You'll see traders balancing baskets or flowers or cages of chickens or pigs. The motorbike is the heartbeat of daily life. It's the sound of a country on the move. Over the years, I've watched Vietnam transform at astonishing speed. When I first came, it was still largely agricultural, rice fields stretching to the horizon, buffalo still pulling ploughs, farmers in conical hats working the land as they had done for centuries. Within a generation, that picture has changed massively. Vietnam embraced the industrialization and modernity with remarkable determination. Government plans incentivized people to move towards industrialization. Roads that were dirt tracks are now smooth highways linking remote valleys. Schools have improved, hospitals have expanded, and opportunities have multiplied. It's a country of progress and momentum, a true tiger economy. The energy everywhere is intangible. The ambition is infectious. And yet beneath all that change, the essence of Vietnam still endures: the warmth, the hospitality, the strength of community. On paper, it's a communist country, it's a socialist regime, and I think that socialism is very evident if you're in rural Vietnam, where people help each other and support each other. The open road still winds through the same rice terraces and mountains, but now it hums with the rhythm of a country in transition, a country that refuses to stand still. They're grasping progress and driving forward at astonishing rate. So here's how it began. When I first arrived in Sapa, I was a young environmental scientist with a rucksack full of essentials, a head full of ideas. I was working on a biodiversity conservation project in the Hoang Lian Sen National Park in Sapa, and my job was to gather baseline biodiversity data to support environmental protection plans in northern Vietnam. Much of my work was using camps and base camps on the edge of a hillside just outside of Sapa town. It felt remote. We had to walk everywhere. It was damp. It rained constantly for the first few weeks I was here. It was also utterly unforgettable. Each morning, a small group of Hmong girls, children, would appear at the entrance to our tent. They knew we were there. and either barefooted or in traditional sandals, they would knock on the tent doors, bright-eyed, eager to practice English with the curious foreigners. We were still an unusual sight then. They learnt some English by listening to tourists and mimicked what they'd heard. They were sharp, thoughtful young girls, and full of questions about a world that seemed distant and far away to them. They wanted to learn. I knew they didn't go to school, but they all wanted that opportunity. Myself and my work colleagues, these girls were fascinated by us. We laughed together, we shared stories, and we traded language. It was very important for us to learn some local language too, so it was great to be able to trade. They also guided us through their world, and I learnt from them in turn. It was very mutual. Beneath the laughter, there were stories of hardship and hope, of girls who wanted an education and a chance at something more. Now, that connection led me to another British couple to start a small charity focused on building a vocational training centre for ethnic minority youth, particularly young women in Sapa. And for a while it worked. Local complexities, political sensitivity that I'm not going to go into now, eventually forced us to move and close. Wording like it's too good for local ethnic minorities were touted at the time. But still, there was a seed planted, and it's grown ever since. I began to wonder whether tourism, which was beginning to become established in the area, done differently, could offer more than just an income for people, perhaps pride and preservation, dignity, and of course linking it back to my environmental issues. That question stayed with me for years, and through forests and mountain trails and quiet moments of thought and reflection. Then I met Hoa. So I was in Vietnam working on an ethos project, and I travelled to Mai Chau, which is a couple of hours from Hanoi. Hanoi for me is a big modern city, and I wanted to get out and explore a little bit for a weekend trip. I disappeared with a friend of mine, and I met Hoa, who was there during one of her university field trips. She stood out immediately. Curious in me, but also confident and unafraid to ask unusual questions. And the first thing she ever asked me, I vividly remember it, was whether I had a dental plan. It's a question I've never been asked before or since. Whereas everyone else was asking quite predictable questions. How old are you? Where are you from? Are you married? The blend of humour and boldness caught me off guard. And we've been talking together ever since. We've been working together and walking together ever since. We married. Spent a few years living in England while I completed a postgraduate degree in teaching and eventually returned to Sapa permanently. And in 2012, we founded Ethos Spirit the Community as a revised version of the old organisation I used to run. It wasn't really a rebrand, it was more of a rebirth. We wanted something rooted, regenerative, and genuinely locally led, but also a community that eventually people could thrive in and take over. And slowly travellers began to find us, then guidebooks, then journalists. And recognition was never our goal, but of course recognition is important if you're running a business. What mattered most was what began to shift within the community. Many of the same Mongols that had once stood outside my tent became ethos guides. They led treks, they ran workshops and welcomed visitors with confidence and pride. It was fantastic to see. Their growth became our greatest success story. Then one day we met a family who changed everything. It was about 2007, I can't recall the exact year, but I think it was then. Hoa and I were trekking through a village not too far from Sapa when we came across a small wooden hut, kind of noticeably stuck out on its own, very windy hillside. And inside was a young family who were clearly struggling. Parents, 3 kids. The roof was hanging off, the walls were full of gaps and holes. It really wasn't a great place to live. But their youngest daughter, Cha, had been born in a storm, we found out later. Apparently literally swept from her mother's arms by floodwaters before her father pulled her from the floodwaters and kind of brought her back into the home. Their life was hard. There was poverty. We later found out there was drug use, addiction within the home, and unfortunately domestic violence. I only recently found out there are actually 5 kids in the family, but 2 unfortunately died of illness during infancy. When we met them, they were surviving. They certainly weren't a thriving family. It was a case of growing rice, not necessarily enough, corn, not necessarily enough, and foraging for remaining food. Frogs, mushrooms, berries, whatever they could find to survive. We helped where we could. We built a better roof. Actually, we relocated the home into a less windy area. We built a water tank, so there was less collection of water necessary. We built a chimney and a few piglets. We bought the girls a piglet each, and they ate food scraps, and in turn those piglets grew up and were able to be either eaten or sold. But unfortunately in other areas things worsened. The domestic violence continued and worsened. And Cha's mother eventually decided her best approach was to flee the violence, and she fled to China through a trafficking organization who effectively facilitated her escape, and she disappeared off, and actually none of us have ever seen her since. The children, of course, then were left alone. Cha and me and Saw, the 3 girls, were all different ages. I think Cha was probably the youngest at maybe 8 or 9 at that time. And sometimes they would come and we'd do English lessons with them. We'd teach them a bit of language or do some colouring in. So inevitably they kind of gravitated towards where we were staying at the time. And I remember meeting Cha soon after her mum left. She was barefooted and quite ill. She ended up coming to stay with us and really never left, and has become like a daughter to us. Over time she's healed, she's studied, she's grown into an extraordinary young woman. She's now one of Ethos's leaders, running our human trafficking prevention program. She teaches in Hmong. She runs regular litter collections in the village. She's given a voice to many other people who've historically been silenced. Her sister So wasn't as lucky at first. She too was trafficked, but she escaped. We found her months later in a border town and managed to bring her back into Sapa. That's another story for another day. But these kind of stories broke us open, and they began to redefine our purpose. Together, Cha and So helped us build a prevention program that uses storytelling, role-playing and cultural education to protect girls before they fall into danger. And in some areas that we work, trafficking rates have dropped by more than 70%. So it really is meaningful work. But we feel like we're just at the beginning. It's a program that we want to continue long into the future. Through all of this, I've kind of learned that doing things the right way isn't always simple. I mean, the work we do here is slow. It's often uncomfortable. But I think it matters. At least it matters to those who are most affected. Ethos has definitely become a living community. Not a business or a company. We're not a charity. I see it as a commitment. When people travel on an Ethos trek or doing a motorbike trip, which is how we specialise these days, they're not just trekking through landscapes, really. Our mission is to allow people to kind of investigate and learn and to progress through the rice terraces in a way that allows you to hear stories and belong in a society, and listen to real people. So this podcast, The Open Road Vietnam, is an extension of that idea. At one level, this is simply a podcast about the open road, about travel, exploration and adventure. I want it to be about the joy of the journey, the open throttle on a motorbike, the sweeping bends, the smell of rain on tarmac, but it's also about the road in Vietnam itself and the road that Vietnam is travelling on. The twists and turns of a nation in motion, striving forward, reinventing itself, yet still deeply rooted in traditions that I find fascinating, traditions I've learned about and been involved in. And as I ride through towns and villages, I see that change everywhere. In the new highways, cutting through farmland, in smartphones glowing in tiny cafes, and in the children who switch effortless between Hmong, Vietnamese, and even English. This podcast isn't just about where the road takes us, but more about where Vietnam has come from and where Vietnam is going. Because the open road isn't just a journey, it's a reflection of progress, resilience, and hopefully possibility into the future. For me, travel by motorbike has always been more than just a way of getting from one place to another. It's a way of seeing the world in slow motion, to feel the wind, to smell the fields and notice the small things. I don't think you get that from a car. You're driving along looking through a single pane of glass, whereas on a bike, everything's visceral. You're involved in it rather than passing through. Over the years, I've ridden many kinds of bikes. My first bike in Vietnam was an old Minsk 125 that I bought in Hanoi. Follow that with a Honda Bonus, then a Sufat Win, a cheap, dodgy bike, but my first ever new one. Then more recently, a Royal Enfield Himalayan 411, and now a CF Moto 450 MT. All told, I've covered way more than 500,000 kilometers in Vietnam, possibly more than 800,000 kilometers. Higher bikes, I've never really recorded distance on them. But most of those kilometers have been across northern Vietnam, the rugged back roads, the mountains, the area that I live in and call home. And I believe that every journey teaches you something about the country, about its people, but also about yourself. So what to expect? Well, this podcast will share those lessons, hopefully, and experiences, stories from the road, travel advice for visitors and long-term residents, if people are interested, and honest conversations with locals and travellers alike. Hopefully we'll have guest speakers, we'll have people coming in and contributing. And what I want to do is explore what it really means to travel responsibly, to engage deeply, and to experience Vietnam beyond the surface, which, to be honest, many people fail to do. So if that sounds interesting, subscribe, follow the journey, join me each week here on the Open Road Vietnam, and together we'll navigate the highlands, the back roads, the human stories that make this place so extraordinary. Because the road's open, I want this to be a beginning. The story's beginning, and I want you to follow. So thanks for listening. If you've got questions, you can access us via email. We've got a YouTube account. We're always welcome to people watching videos there and asking whatever you want to ask. But let's build a community. Thanks for joining me on the Open Road Vietnam today. If you've enjoyed this episode, feel free to follow, subscribe, and share it with anyone who loves travel and meaningful stories. So until next time, keep exploring, ride safely, and I'll see you further down the road.